from their breakout rooms and their lunches and or breakfasts, depending on where you are. So again, I want to welcome everyone to the Smart City Technology in Innovation Districts module, the second module of our 4-module spring training that'll be taking place during the month of April. Hopefully you had some good reflection on last week's module in your breakout session. And pleased to welcome everyone to the Smart City Technology Innovation Districts module number 2 for our spring training. And I want to recognize Wexford Science and Tech for their annual sponsorship. And they also provided they hosted lunch last week. And I think we're going to, Vicki, are we going to have a slide? Yes. So we're going to see a slide of the grand opening of the Phoenix Biomedical Campus in Arizona. As you know, Arizona is where AURP was founded 35 years ago. So I have a special affinity to all things Arizona, including University of Arizona Tech Parks, our diamond sponsor, and that's where our headquarters is. So with that, I think we're going to roll the opening of the Phoenix Biomedical Campus. And I think this has sound.
We don't hear the sound.
Yes. Well, this is the lobby. I'll do some narration. This is local art. That's a door, and this is Lab 4 CEI lab.
I can do beatbox if that helps. I'm just kidding.
It is a beautiful building, and as we mentioned, this is Wexford at Arizona State University. But this overall campus, I know a little bit about this. This is where the 3 major universities, University of Arizona, Arizona State, and Northern Arizona, all have facilities right around this area. It's one of the few places in the state where all the 3 major universities have physical places. So this is a great convergence center. And obviously some bench spaces there. And
do each of those institutions have space within this building, do you know?
not this building. I think this is all Arizona State, but University of Arizona and Northern Arizona have facilities near here. Yeah, there's the NAU, Northern Arizona University. And Colliers, I guess, is the broker. So there's, in case anyone's interested, there's contact information. All right, so I think we are done with that. And now I'm going to turn this over to Mark Romney, who is co-chair of the AURP Spring Training and is leading this particular module. So Mark, take it away.
Great, Brian. Thank you so much, and welcome everybody. Good morning to my colleagues on the West Coast, and good afternoon to my friends in the Midwest and the East Coast. As you're putting together this panel, I figured I would take on the most challenging panel, something I knew the least about, which is sort of that smart city, smart innovation, and technology. And for those things that I didn't know, I reached out to friends in multiple different sectors and industries to sort of help educate me and hopefully the rest of you on some of the technology, what you need to know and what you need to know, and what you need and what you need to know on this. So again, I'm the Chief Strategy Officer, Chief Industry Alliance Officer at UC Davis for Aggie Square, which is a new innovation district of just about 1.2 million square feet. It's in development and will be under construction by the end of the year. If I can ask everybody and remind everybody again to turn off your cameras and your audio because we are recording this session. it'll make it simpler for Vicki and Diana to sort of manage the recording on that as well. So if we could go to the next slide, we've got the panel. I think everybody's seen the bios and of the panelists. So I don't want to spend too much time, but we've got a great group of folks here. What I'd like to do, though, I'm going to ask Ivo, if you don't mind, to sort of give us the 30,000-foot perspective and overview of really what a smart city is. And that'll allow us to sort of go into the discussion of some of the finer details about smart cities, smart technology.
Yes, sure, Mark. Thank you for having us, of course. And to describe a smart city would almost be impossible, but let me try and immediately for the audience, bring into perspective what type of an environment you're going to be working in. First of all, what everybody needs to realize is that smart cities, smart zones is a incredibly competitive environment. So just to be smart as a city or an environment is not going to be good enough. You actually need to come up with a strategy. Why is your city smarter than other cities? Because all of them to a certain extent will be smart. So in order for you to deal with that challenge, there are basically three challenges I believe you need to be focusing on. Number one is the identity of your smart city. I'll give you three examples. In Phoenix, Brian will like this. They invested enormously in the correlation and the working between developers and students. It was a really smart niche to get started. Peachtree Corners near Atlanta did a brilliant job offering to blend laboratory work and the reality. So even City Hall was built in the laboratory environment, and you could practice autonomous cars on a controlled environment, but then also blend into the real city. So they chose the identity of being able to blend reality with virtual reality. And then a third very good example is Greenville, who had, of course, to compete with other environments, and they doubled down in micro-positioning, creating the perfect environment for all kinds of robotics companies to set up shop there. Now, what I said first, it is a competitive environment. So don't just think we're going to be smart and therefore you'll be noticed. No, you have to create that identity so that people notice you within the smart cities. Second, very important rule, it's not about technology. It's actually, and this may sound boring, but it is absolutely relevant. It is about finance. Too many smart city projects are initially funded with grants and do not, as part of their development, come up with a strategy to become cash flow positive. And it is like a business. If you're not cash flow positive, you can't reinvest in your smart city, you can't keep it updated, and it will end in a pilot phase. So it is a tough message, but smart cities is also about creating cash management. And the third thing, and I like this part most, is communicate about your purpose. Give you a really good example of what we've done here in New York. It was a very simple one. 87% of the world's population live in cities. 70% of all emissions are in the largest cities. And we could reduce the energy consumption of every building by 50%. So there came the purpose. It was energy consumption of buildings going down. Gives a very big, broad appeal combined with your identity. That's how you stand out as a smart city. Mark, back to you.
Ivo, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And maybe I'd like to maybe understand a little bit more about the evolution of what the smart city or how the term was coined and really how it evolved. Can you maybe touch on that for me?
Yeah, definitely. Initially triggered by technology, it was the case that there were all kinds of individual use cases. So there was a sensor being able to manage or measure something that they couldn't manage or measure before. And then with an individual use case, and then they started to bundle the use cases, whether it was waste management, energy management, but they were all individual use cases. That's how it started, basically triggered by two things: more sensors and easier networking. What we now see is that that is turning because all these different vertical use cases are becoming platforms, where cities basically say, listen, rather than have all these individual use cases, we control the platform based upon which you can ingest your data and others can develop applications on top of. It's very important also to kind of create a controlled cash flow environment where the benefits are being fed back by those who invest. The second big trend that we're seeing is that where initially it was triggered by simple sensors who would measure one or two things, whether that be air quality, whether it be pressure, whether it be anything, are becoming more advanced sensors. So we're moving from simple sensors to video sensing, advanced radar sensing, which offers an enormous possibility in technology, but offers also challenges, I'm sure we'll talk about later, in privacy and security. And the last one is, and I kind of said it at the beginning, is that the bar is raising all the time. Citizens expect a city to be smart. And that in itself is putting an enormous burden now on technology, because when you expect something to be smart, you expect an outcome before you even engage, which means that we need to focus much more attention on the interaction of the citizens with the technology.
Thank you very much. And just to remind everybody, if you have questions at all, please put them in the chat, and when we get to the Q&A, I'll be happy to relay those to the panel. Next, I want to talk about maybe the adoption of technology by the municipalities. And Andy, do you mind providing an overview of that?
Yeah, I think that's a good segue and introduction from Ivo. Diana, if you wouldn't mind just bringing up my first slide, just trying to summarize smart cities and kind of the base goals of smart cities. I don't know if Diana can pull that up. Yeah, as Ivo pointed out, it's a multifaceted approach as you look at the relation of technology to your smart city goals. There's a lot of things that are involved with it. He already talked about environmental impact, mobility, connecting devices, these types of things. But if you, Diana, if you could advance the slide, if you just look at kind of the base, actually, no, there was a transition there. Sorry. I guess it doesn't work. I'll just talk. There it goes. Yes. So to Ivo's point, these are kind of the three things that we see in terms of smart city goals. Obviously, economic competitiveness. It has to be financially viable. Obviously, there's a sustainability component. But really, ultimately, what you're trying to do is create this quality of life that attracts people to your communities, whether that's new residents, new businesses, visitors to your communities. These things all kind of add up to really create goals that you want to strive for in terms of your smart city projects. And I think the role of technology, and Ivo had already pointed it out, is how you facilitate this. And one of the macro trends that we're seeing is that more and more devices are being connected to the internet. So this whole notion of the Internet of Things. If you look at statistics, there's statistics that say there's going to be 75 billion connected devices within the next 5 years. I mean, that's a lot of devices to connect. So it really presents a lot of challenges. First, how do you connect to those devices? So there's a lot of media options that you have available to you. You can connect via copper infrastructure. You can connect via fiber optics or wireless. And wireless, there's a lot of different flavors of wireless to connect your devices together. But once you have all of this in place, you have challenges in terms of, how do you process the information that you're extracting from these devices? So from a technology perspective, we always try and talk to our customers to make sure that they have a solid foundation from an infrastructure point of view, to make sure that whatever infrastructure choices that you have, that you can adapt to the needs of the users, in this case, the citizens of the smart city. So really, this whole notion of creating a utility for all of your data communications and your services is really the main thing you want to achieve. And also what we're also seeing broadly is the processing needs are also changing. And I'll touch on this a little bit later in the second session. But there's this notion of low latency infrastructure, which is really the time it takes to process information. So The relevance of that is if you think about self-autonomous vehicles, the way it processes information has to be very quick. You can't take information, send it to a vehicle, and go all the way back to the core of the network. To some degree, that information has to be processed closer to the vehicle. And this is this notion of edge-based computing. So this whole edge infrastructure that facilitates these low latency systems have to be put in place. And I think that has to be still built out. But in terms of the infrastructure, that's where you need to really focus, because smart cities is great, but if you can't have devices communicating in an efficient manner, it doesn't really matter. If you advance to the next slide, the other thing I wanted to talk about is the impact of obviously COVID. So if you look at traditional public safety within smart cities, it's really been focused around physical security and crime prevention. I think there's been a bit of a pivot, obviously, with COVID to more of a health safety component. So looking at ways that you can make the environment safer in terms of reducing the spread of pathogens and viruses and things like that. So there's a lot of new advancements that are happening. Obviously, surveillance is widespread. Obviously, there's cameras everywhere, but what a lot of people don't know is that there's been a lot of advancements in video analytics. So the camera now becomes not just a recording device to capture video data, surveillance data, crimes, those types of things, but it's now a sensor. You can use it to capture motion data. You can use it for thermographic imaging. So there's people counting sensors, for instance, and people counting capabilities within cameras. So you can actually look at where people are congregating in different spaces if they're separated. So things like social distancing, you can also look at that within the camera technologies, and these are all available. So it'll be interesting to see how these really get adopted within the smart city environments, but these are technologies from a video analytics perspective that are really changing fast. And I'll just close. The next slide is just kind of more of a broad view of COVID and the impact on the community, because the communities are going to have to adapt. Obviously, you got a couple choices. You can go back to how you did things before COVID, which is probably not going to fly for most folks, because obviously the dynamics have changed quite a bit. But you can basically change and adapt your environment to ensure that you've got a safer and healthier environment for your community. So there's a lot of things obviously that will need to change, things like more outdoor dining, more activity based analytics, these types of things I think will start to be deployed across a wider scale across the buildings and communities. But that's kind of the broad answer there, Mark. I don't know if you have any other specific follow-up questions, but this is kind of how we view the smart cities adapting kind of in this new age.
Andy, thank you very much. And I failed to sort of have, even though everybody's got the bios that were sent out, if Ivo and then Andy just give a one or two sentence sort of description of your role and what you do. Ivo, if you want to go first. Sorry about that.
Yes, so I've been working in connecting IoT networks across the world for a very long time, and I'm also a board member in a chip company who produces now custom-built IoT chips on American soil with enhanced security inside. And I'm also a board member in a software company called Digitize Things that basically help IoT companies such as operators, but also MVNOs to build their end-to-end solutions. And finally, I'm advising I Squared Capital, which is an private equity company, on technology investments.
Fantastic. Ivo. Andy, do you want to go?
Yeah, Mark. So my name is, again, Andy Jimenez. I'm part of Wesco Anixter. We're an $18 billion global distributor. We have a presence in 52 countries around the world. And we really service three broad businesses. We've got our communications and security solutions division. We have an electrical electronics supply division, and a utility broadband services division. My role at Anixter is really to guide their technology strategy globally. So looking at new product opportunities, new market segments, working closely with industry leaders to really take new solutions and technologies to the customers and the customer segments that we serve. And I'm based just outside of Chicago. This is in Glenview, Illinois. This is where our corporate headquarters is.
Great.
I have a lab back here, so it's, I've been actually coming back to the office since last April. So, because there's some stuff you can't do virtually. You have to get your hands dirty and do some stuff and connect things together. So,
no question. Thank you so much, Andy. And one of the next question and is Nathaniel Lee from the FBI. And it's really protecting the innovation concentration in these innovation districts, because it's great to have all this technology, but I'm fortunate to have three friends from the FBI. And Nathaniel, if you could sort of touch on sort of, how to protect some of the innovation that's being developed in these innovation districts.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for letting me join the conversation today along with my colleagues. So from the FBI's perspective and security, when it comes to smart cities, innovation districts, openness and sharing of knowledge, right? Connectedness is what enables progress. But along with that comes what we'll collectively say as bad actors, whether for criminal financial gains or state-sponsored actors. Bad actors will take advantage, will abuse those trusted relationships. So the key is, how do we balance the collaboration that enables progress with security measures to prevent the abuse? So first, about the security spectrum, right? So you have prevention. How do we build it to prevent bad things from happening in the first place? We have mitigation. How do we fix it if something does happen? Recovery, right? Getting back to normal. That's on those things on the business operation side. And then along with that, you have the investigation. What happened? How did it happen? The attribution, who did it, right? So traditionally, the FBI comes in on the investigation and attribution side. There are things that we can also collaborate with, with private entities to help on the mitigation, the prevention side, intelligence and things like that we can share. Our message usually is to have security build and have it baked in as we build out these smart cities, right? Because the attribution, the investigation side is only as good as the information and the evidence that is available for analysis. So if we don't have it baked in as we build out, we don't think about these things as we build out, when something that does happen when we come in, well, there's nothing there for us to look at. There's no trail. That's kind of the message that we would like to pass on today, which is we would love to engage early, and then later on for this presentation, we'll talk more about sharing and training and things like that. But there are things that we can do as we engage. So we have that feedback loop that goes, and as we build it out, we would have a more secure, more hardened smart city.
That's great. It's surprising because many people think that their technology or their information or networks are fairly secure, but I'm sure there's a lot more activity going on that we're not aware of, right?
Right. And the internet, was originally built decades ago for the purpose of sharing. So when that was built with that purpose, it wasn't built to, for lack of a better, it was built with security baked in, right? And we kind of retroactively put in security measures as people find loopholes and people find things, ways to exploit. And so learning from that, how do we build out smart cities and how do we build out these things with security as a forethought, security as one of the key elements to consider as we expand.
Definitely. And we'll touch on a little bit more, but I just want to share with the attendees as well. I was connected with the FBI early on in our Aggie Square development, and their philosophy was like, let us get involved with you early to help prevent more, activities or, versus coming in and trying to diagnose and determine who did what or who hacked into your system. So they've been extremely helpful as a resource. So I extend a recommendation to everybody to really leverage the opportunities and any relationship you can with the FBI. It's just been a great resource for us. So thank you so much, Nathaniel. I'd like to jump into some vertical and or linear sample applications. So one of the areas is about supply chain and the digital background. And Rose Chen, Rose, do you mind sort of providing an overview of the supply chain and digital background area and how it might apply to the innovation districts?
Yeah, thank you, Mark, for asking this question. So as everyone know that, the disruptions that have affected a lot of the cities during this pandemic also accelerate technology adoption. And a lot of us, including cities, organizations, are really taking a deliberate approach to adopt technologies that can really help us. It is an unprecedented time that we're currently in. And, what we're used to, simple things such as traveling, picking up groceries, face-to-face meetings are no longer a norm. And we are really learning from this period of time and adapt by working remotely. Currently, probably a year ago, no one really knows the Zoom, all the functionalities of Zoom. And now everyone seems to know how to do breakout rooms and jump into Zoom within minutes. And in supply chain, we are actually seeing a lot of disruptions with this period of time. And Andy also touched upon that. Interestingly, from a smart cities perspective, we're also thinking more from a safety and health angle when we are dealing with this pandemic. And so what we are seeing in supply chain is, I think there are three elements that is very important. One is resiliency. Number two, transparency. And number three, flexibility. And so I'm going to touch upon each one of them. Resiliency, which really means that we need to be able to access certain goods and materials. And I think during this period of time, we learned about groceries, actually essential goods that sometimes are not available during this pandemic. And we're learning that it is important to build that kind of a resiliency. And at Wesco, since we are a supply chain, we do offer supply chain advanced solutions to our customers and to ourselves as well. We use AI to really help onboard suppliers to increase supply chain resiliency. And in terms of transparency, we hear from our customers that we want to know where the status of our materials are. We want to know where the status of our goods are. So we are we're seeing a lot of new technologies sprouting from this area to orchestrate a much better customer experience to provide that visibility of goods and availability as well. And then third of all, in terms of flexibility, we're seeing a lot more fleets, last mile delivery, really going into this area to help us to get to our goods within a very short period of time, 2 hours window, next day delivery. Maybe we can, there's also micro fulfillment centers that are currently becoming a new type of technology we're currently looking at, and I can touch upon more. So I just wanted to kind of give you a high level overview of what we're seeing in terms of the supply chain area.
Rose, thank you so much. And I forgot to ask you, just sort of give the brief sort of overview of your role at Anixter Wesco.
Yes, I am leading innovation, partnerships, and investment at Wesco, which is a global publicly listed company, Fortune 200, with we have 800 warehouses and branches in 50 countries. And a colleague of mine, Andy, was just giving an overview just from a smart city angle. And I actually look at all different verticals. But today I'd like to really touch upon how we're seeing from a supply chain angle. But of course, there's also the health angle that we're looking at to how to ensure that our workers are safe in our warehouses, because we're essential business during this period of time providing critical infrastructure.
Great. Thank you so much, Rose. And next, I'm going to turn to Alex. And if you could touch on first, do a little of your overview of your role with Siemens and X47, and then if you don't mind touching on things like the smart building technologies, pollution monitoring, but also in your areas, it's also about where you guys are investing and where you sort of see that those opportunities.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here, Mark. I'm part of Next47, which is Siemens venture arm organization, which is basically looking at technology innovation around the globe. We annually meet with probably 1,500 different companies, and out of those companies, we choose maybe 10 to 15 technology leaders, which we believe in going to be the next thing on the market, and we put our money on those innovation technologies. And my role is basically to increase the business development activities for those portfolio companies. Siemens is definitely a major player in smart cities and smart buildings. Siemens has a tremendous amount of technology and tools that you can utilize in order not only to think about smart city as a title for discussion, but really dive into specifics of analytics of what does it mean. And Siemens has created a tool which is called the City Performance Tool, which is being utilized by several cities around the world and being utilized by Los Angeles, San Francisco, and a few others. If you go online, you can probably find this tool. What it allows you to do actually is to create immeasurable outcomes of your progress in making your city to be a smart city. And if you went online, look at one of the reports, you will see that actually, talking about smart city, usually people talking 25 years, 50 years into the future, okay? But there are things which you can do today in order to dramatically improve the city of today or next 5 years, okay? And through the analysis of what I've seen is, putting things like heat pumps instead of, gas burning ovens to heat the facilities, okay, creates tremendous, impact on not only in the environment, but, cost savings and air quality, which is all tied together to the smart cities. Of course, we know the electrical cars is going to tremendously improve the environment. It's also creating new job creation and provides very cost efficient innovation. For putting rooftop panels with solar systems is definitely something we can do today, not wait for the future. And the fourth one is basically improvement of the metro lines. We have a great metro lines to commute people between one place to another. People are going to save, on driving their own cars and decrease pollution. So we're really looking at those four pillars of innovation. And the beauty about those pillars is that we don't have to wait for the future for them to happen. We can happen do it today. Regarding the pollution in the building itself, Siemens has invested in two companies. One's called Comfy and another one's called Enlightened. Those two companies have been spun out as separate companies, and both of them allows you to basically deploy tremendous amounts of sensors inside the buildings, which will monitor temperature, air pollution, occupancy, and all the other parameters. Okay, and then also it's provided with a set of software tools, which allows you not only to deploy the sensors, but also to manage them through orchestrated environment, which allows you really to see what is their impact. So I urge everybody to, of course, give some more readouts online about those things which I mentioned. If you have any more questions, reach out to me.
Alex, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Next, I'd like to Ashish Atria, Dr. Atria, if you could introduce yourself a little bit, but I'd like you to sort of touch on an area really about healthcare applications in the smart city or smart innovation technology.
No, happy to, Mark, and thanks for inviting me here. It's great to hear the perspectives from different verticals. And I just wanted to resonate with some of the discussion that's going on in the chat, that smart city is not about technology. it's more about the purpose and how people leverage technology smartly, right? I'm the Chief Information Officer and Chief Digital Health Officer of UC Davis Health, and recently moved from East Coast, where I was Chief Innovation Officer in medicine at Mount Sinai Health System. And for me and for our health system, the focus has been how to leverage smart city platform for health and well-being. And that is something that we plan to work very closely with Aggie Square, and really make Davis Sacramento as a hub for digital health and innovation, right? I do believe, just my background is as a physician, last 25 years. This is my, I would say, a fourth career life with being a physician, then an informaticist and technologist, and then really as an innovator. And really my heart is in transformation. And that's where I see convergence between smart city and smart healthcare. Just to give few examples of the vertical from healthcare, there's an enormous change happening, and that has really been energized, accelerated by COVID, as you know, with virtual care as well as digital health. You can see access care right from your right from your home. So we are creating a whole convergence between a smart hospital. We have a new building which is around $4 billion investment, and putting sensors, indoor pollution measures, and all those kind of technologies within a hospital to smart ambulatory care, where you can actually do an express care with any physician, with a lot of physicians in UC Davis Health, to smart homes, where we want to bring these technologies to connect patients every time. In fact, we have initiatives around healthy aging in digital world, as well as a community where we want to really support work with builders to really create healthy communities, and really extend the rubric of engagement for healthcare right at home. So this discussion is so relevant for us, and I think healthcare can be and should be really one of the central purpose of a smart city, in my opinion.
Ashish, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Next, I'd like to bring in Yang Li from the FBI. And Yang, if you can touch on some of the vulnerabilities and how to protect the data, and sort of first give it sort of an overview of your role in the FBI and where you're located.
Hi, thank you, Mark. Good afternoon or good morning to everyone. I am an analyst. I'm located at FBI headquarters here in Washington, D.C., and we provide support to all field offices. And our unit specifically looks at emerging technologies and the types of technologies that cyber actors may be interested in targeting and exploiting to gain access to data or encrypt or with ransomware, or just to have an impact on such, for example, such as what we're talking about here, smart cities or local governments. The cyber threats are likely going to continue as a hot topic of discussion, and it will definitely increase the vulnerabilities to the data, devices, and networks. But as cities start to increase or integrate the Internet of Things or emerging technologies, the devices, the networks, and the data transmitted will likely become like an appealing target for cyber actors. For example, in 2020, the FBI received over 2,400 complaints about ransomware attacks encrypting the data, resulting in a little over $29.1 million in losses. Some of the most common methods that cyber actors have used were email phishing campaigns, or using brute force to obtain user credentials to gain unauthorized access, unauthorized remote access through the desktop protocol to victim networks to deploy malware, ransomware. Some of the mitigations that we've have provided or have been to protect data, devices, or networks is some of the basic, as far as changing default passwords, ensuring software is updated or patched, using multi-factor authentication, logging remote desktop protocol, login attempts. This aids with attribution, assists with investigations to identify who did it and how. backing up the data and ensuring the integrity of the data such that there is no malware on the backups, protecting administrative credentials by practicing the principle of least privilege, and internal training, something that organizations can do where they can provide email phishing campaigns to their employees, just to awareness and maybe determine a baseline for how much knowledge their employees have about cybersecurity threats. The FBI's capabilities, our resources, and our partnership and engagement, such as like today, and aids us in learning about what technologies are developing and what cyber actors may be interested in targeting, and allows us to help collect intelligence and share indicators that enables our partners to use measures to detect future cyber attacks.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Next, I would like to sort of transition into more of the looking into the future of innovation districts or smart innovation districts. So I'm going to hit up a couple of you guys just talking about certain areas and really think about from now into the future, areas where you think we either need to advance or areas where you see advancements being made. And Eva, if I can start with you on the sort of the technology on the horizon, get your thoughts.
Yeah, so first of all, of course, there's an enormous amount of talk about 5G networks. We've heard it earlier that will reduce latency, increase the speed and so on. But I wanted to draw your attention to something else that comes with 5G, is not being discussed a lot yet, but actually increases the odds of municipalities and cities to participate in smart cities. And that is that underneath 5G, the entire management of the core of mobility networks is changing. And I believe it creates advantages for the cities because, first of all, operators are in desperate need of network densification and rooftops, which, by the way, I of course think that cities should accommodate that. But I also think now, knowing that they have a new core management, you should ask a few things in advance that puts you in a good position to create smart cities, because with the new core management, it's also possible to create portions of the network and dedicate them for specific development that is unshared with public usage of networks. And I'd like to compare it a little bit. If you own a city and there's a company that wants to, roll out a highway through your city, you would think once or twice, what is the purpose? How are you going to do with it? And so on. And you need to start to look at 5G as digital pavement in your cities. So in exchange for rooftops or right-of-way, operators would be able to create capacity or other core networks for you that actually allow also better perimeter protection for smart city investments. So that is just coming from the operator world. I tell you, we would do everything for rooftops and right-of-way, and try and insist on that everything a little bit more. Another thing that I believe needs your attention is the smart growth of the fast growth of AI cameras. Once a camera has seen and learned something with ML underneath, I'll spare you all the details, it can't unsee it. So AI cameras may be used for one purpose, but as software develops, can be used for many more purposes. An AI camera that monitors traffic can be taught to monitor temperature, footfall, humidity, air quality. Don't think of cameras as things that see only video. An AI camera can see so many more things. And that brings me to the third very relevant technology possibility that is at the crossroad of also financial benefit. And that is starting to think about what I call canvas data. Canvas data means that as you have a smart city and you have sensors deployed, you should be able to capture in a canvas. So normally navigation companies do this with pentagons. Yeah, you should build a database of what it is that you know of every long LED in the city. and find a way to expose that data to others so that they can engage in your city, not immediately having to deploy their sensors, because you may already know it. And that in itself is incredibly important, because otherwise you're going to have millions of sensors, most of them measuring the same thing. Whereas you could actually provide almost like a toll gate into your city saying, listen, these data layers I already have. You want to set up shop, then come to my city under these conditions. You can have access to this data and you do not have to deploy these sensors. So in a nutshell, focus about the core of 5G, not just on the speed of the networks, AI cameras, and try and find the canvas model. I'll come back to this later, Mark, because Leah asked a very interesting question in the chat box, but we'll park that at Q&A.
Ivo, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Andy, it's a challenge to you on the infrastructure pathway. So the technology is great, but the infrastructure to me seems like it's got to be thought ahead. And what's the best way to plan for that?
Yeah, and I think it's just really to adapt and be up to speed with what's happening within the industry. So again, to tag along with Ivo was indicating, at the core of the network in terms of capacity, the industry is working hard to increase that. So there's active projects, for instance, from the IEEE, which is the Institute of Electronics and Electrical Electronics Engineers. There's a subcommittee called the 802.3 that's developing new technology around beyond 400 gigabit per second transmission. So in most core networks today, you have either 100 or 400 gig networks that are operating within these data centers and out to the access layers. But now you've got a new technology that will be developed, and this will be online probably in the next 4 to 5 years, upwards of 800 gig to terabit Ethernet, data rates. So from core to access, I think the capacity issue is not going to be so much a concern. I think, as you get closer to the edge, to Ivo's point, as you get to a much more dense network, it really becomes, how do you access the network in an effective manner? Because I think, we talk a lot about, broadband access in this country, and I'd say the majority of folks do have access. I'd say, I saw a statistic the other day, I think it was like 93% of Americans have access to broadband. And just got me thinking, as we get more into a digital realm, there's still 7% of the population, which equates to 21 million people, that don't have access. So as we start getting to this more dense network and become more distributed, we're going to have to start building this out so everyone has access that wants it. And I think that's kind of the key thing that we have to kind of look at. But to me, once you have that kind of physical layer infrastructure, that fourth utility that I talked about earlier, I think then you can start doing some really interesting things from an application perspective. There's AI. Everything's being managed in the cloud these days. So once you have more ways to connect, better ways to connect across more diverse users, I think sky's the limit in terms of the application use cases that can be developed. So I think in terms of the future of where technology is going to play a role in smart cities, it's almost a blank canvas, so to speak, because you've got all these new technologies that are being developed and will be coming online over the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you very much. And Ashish, can you touch on, sort of tying that back to Andy's comment on the digital side?
No, absolutely. And Andy, you said it very right. I think we cannot have a smart city if we don't have majority of the people leveraging those technology in a smart manner. And I can share the example of a healthcare vertical, and especially our UC Davis approach. We are really bent upon not only making the latest technologies available like Express Care, as well as remote monitoring at home, but actually looking at, do people have smartphone? Do people have broadband? And more importantly, what we're finding a gap is, do people have digital literacy to use them in the right manner? And we believe the healthcare system's role, a physician's role, a clinician's role is gonna be evolving from not just giving access to an app or a technology, but actually having a system in place where someone teaches the patients, communities, how to actually leverage it in the right manner, right? And I'm taking the example of our Healthy Aging in Digital World, which is a big idea project funded by UCD, is how do we have senior citizens leveraging them and connecting them and leveraging them in the same manner as we can have with the young population. So without that, we will not be able to achieve our goal. So digital equity actually has become a central strategic pillar for UC Davis Health. So just wanted to second those thoughts.
Thank you very much, Ashish. Rose, if you could do me a favor on the supply chain side of it. I mean, we all know that it was difficult to get some products. Even Amazon was having problems with the Prime sometimes in delivery and distribution. So through this whole pandemic, but on the supply chain side of it, what do you see coming down in the future in the innovation of changes in supply chain or improvements?
Yeah, I just want to add that to what Ashish said. Digital equity is very important, which also means that, in a smart city, open data, connectivity, those are some of the key elements to a successful deployment, especially in terms of supply chain. And the reason why we're seeing a lot of bottlenecks is because currently, connectivity is not all that great. And at the same time, we don't have data sharing between vendors from the whole value chain. Each one of us have our own data, and then we are keeping it very, for whatever reasons, or maybe it's not really easily accessible. So it's important to think about in the future how to create that kind of an open data network that can really allow collaborations so that we can actually really serve our citizens as well. And so what we're going to see in the future is hopefully, with the connectivity, 5G, we're still seeing some obstacles in terms of internal reception, even though we can use 5G to track and trace materials when it's on the pallets and when it's being transported. But once it goes into the warehouse with transit, and then when it goes into factories, then some of these IoT devices may not really work internally. So we are hoping to see a lot more technology. Currently, we're seeing a very interesting new developments with some of the companies that we're working with to really solve that entire value chain track and trace technology. So I think this is one key area we're going to see explosive growth. And at the same time, we are also in the warehouses, we're relying on some of the, we call it autonomous mobile robots to really help pick and pack and shift. Hopefully, this will actually help us to accelerate adoption, but at the same time, we'll be able to make it more flexible for future deliveries to our customers as well. And on-demand warehousing, micro-fulfillment, explosive growth area. We're seeing a lot of e-commerce company partnering up with retail stores just so we can really get to some remote areas where they may not have access to a warehouse. So it will really increase availability for people that are living in the suburbs as well. So this is beyond smart cities, but I think that's the whole system that has to work within the value chain. And but not least is really health. I think health is a very important in the supply chain area as well. Even within the factories, the warehouses, we wanted to make sure that it's a healthy indoor environments for people that are going to be working in these indoor environments. We are seeing companies that are using virtual sensors to actually measure mold, smog with additional AI and ML capabilities so that we can detect clean air and be able to really allow people to feel they can work in a safe environments.
Thank you very much, Rose. And Alex, I'm not going to ask you to give me any stock tips on the companies you guys are looking at investing, but if you could actually just look into the future on smart building environments in one area, but where do you see advancements realistically coming out in the future in the smart building environments?
A lot around IoT sensors. Of course, like somebody mentioned here, we think IoT is going to be the next thing in the market, which is definitely becomes a security issue, connectivity issue, and brings along so many different problems. We see huge, tremendous amount of startups on the pollution side of air pollution. Probably 20 different companies are trying to break into the space, which we don't currently see specific leaders on that, but they're kind of the same in the same level. But those are the things, we invested into, and it has been mentioned here several times, a company called Verkada, which is, video security, IoT sensors. And I'm glad to hear that you guys share the same opinion that those sensors will become the future of monitoring, because those sensors can speak about temperature, humidity, occupancy, and so many different things. Okay, so the camera becomes an AI IoT sensors. So those are the things that we currently see in the future.
Thank you very much, Alex. And it's an honor to introduce and pose a few questions to a good friend, a special agent, Daryl Elliott with the FBI, who knows more about me, I think, now than my family does, but he's a close friend and he's been a great resource. So Daryl, if you could just briefly introduce yourself, a little bit of your background, and then I'd like you to, if you could, touch on sort of the preventative measures and what you and I started a couple of years ago. Talk about sort of preventative measures and some of the training resources that the FBI has for innovation districts or universities.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate the opportunity. And I've been with the Bureau for about on 22 years now, a lot of it in national security, focused on intellectual property. So that's really the connectivity to the university systems. I've been briefing, this isn't going to steer into a China brief, believe me. You guys have probably all heard enough about China in recent times, but I've been briefing various foreign influence type threats since 2008 to the university system. And realistically, the most important thing that you can do, and this is where Mark and I started a few years back, is develop a relationship with your local FBI office, and more so in the national security venue. Obviously, we do cyber and national security as well. And so if you do not have a current relationship with the FBI, work through me directly. Go through Mark. I'd be happy to introduce you to somebody locally who you could deal with. And the reason I encourage that relationship is it really opens up the doors of opportunity to both allow us to listen to what potential problems you might have, and then for us to provide you threat information back or potential solutions. And so the one thing that I want you to understand from a preventative standpoint, first and foremost, is that smart cities or these type of institutions, your targets. And unfortunately, the Bureau doesn't get to see all these fantastic inventions over time. You guys don't call us up and do ribbon cutting or celebrate with us, but we do unfortunately see a lot of the negative side of the development of technology. And so that's where we're coming from. We don't really have an opinion per se. We just have factual information that we supply information to you about. And the one thing that I've been able to do with Mark, and hopefully we can do this across the country, is we're never going to tell you, don't do work with company X or individual Y, or we're not going to say, no, 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 that's not where the Bureau is coming from. But what we can do potentially for you is allow you to assess risk. And so if you're contemplating what systems to use, who to interact with, what supply chains might be relevant or not relevant, some of the things that we can do is assist you from a risk assessment standpoint. You still make your own decisions. We're not involved with that decision-making process, but we just wanted to make sure that you're educated from our perspective in what we're seeing across the country and around the world. And more so, as much as, Rose mentioned open data, open connectivity, that's hugely important. And that's really the foundation of how successes occur. But we're more of a trust but verify kind of entity, and that you make sure you know who is in your supply chain, make sure you know who you're dealing with, rather than just the surface handshake or promise. And realistically, from the preventative measure standpoint, as we focus in on the development of new technologies, our real pushback to both you in university systems as well as business is, do you know what technology that you're developing? If it's going to be intellectual property, are you identifying it? Are you protecting it? When you're granting user access to systems, is it blanket access to anyone who's working the program, or is it somehow tiered access to where the fundamental components of intellectual property could be at risk or not? And so when we talk about, preventative measures, it's simple stuff. First and foremost, identify it, highlight it. And secondly is account for it, know where it's at and know who has access to it. As far as training, the gamut is really up to you. If you request training from the Bureau on realistically any specific activity, we'll find it and we'll provide it for you. And that's it for now, Mark.
Daryl, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'd like to transition into sort of use a case study. And as UC Davis Health, which is part of UC Davis and UC system, it's an academic health system. And I'd like to sort of do a case study on how smart innovation districts can play a role in advancing healthcare. And Ashish, I'd like to start with you and I'll have others chime in, but going back to some of the examples you shared earlier, can you expand on a few of those that, of the technologies you think that will have a major impact on the delivery of care or treatment of diseases or cures?
Happy to. I think we talked about the continuum, how from smart hospital, where we can actually do patient workflow analysis. We at UC Davis Health, we are the only academic center in a very wide geographical area, from the West Coast, from San Francisco to Salt Lake City, and from South to Portland. We're the only major academic center. So by design, we see ourselves as providing virtual care or care through our affiliate hospitals in this wide region, because not everyone can drive to our campus. So we are looking, over the last 3-4 years, we've gone 25% under Dr. Lubarsky, our new CEO leadership. And then a lot of the focus has been extending, going beyond the 4 walls of the hospital, right? So as concept of that, we feel if we have to build a hospital, which we are building for a new building, it has to be completely smart hospital with hybrid beds that can change from ICU to ORs to regular beds at any stage. It needs to have all the sensors and IoT so we can know what's happening to the patient right from the very beginning of preventing a fall before it happens, right? To creating automatic lights which turn on so people don't get what we call as a ICU confusion, that they get ICU delirium, right? So all those things are pre-built or we are planning in advance. At the same time, we are focusing a lot on how we can have an express care where anyone can immediately, by just a text message, can really connect with our physicians right now, majority of the time of the day, but eventually 24/7 for any care needs. And then extending the technology of the smart hospital to actually at home, which is where we feel working with Aggie Square and University of California, which is a leader in the research part in California state. Half of the NIH funding comes to UC systems. So how do we leverage all those innovation and to bring it together for healthcare and bring this technology to home? I want to share one of the key initiatives we are doing is partnering with a development agency right in Sacramento, working with Aggie Square around community of healthy living, where we are creating, reimagining entire senior citizen living space, not only from a work, not only from living perspective, but actually having fitness centers, which are very relevant to connectivity to the healthcare, which is just a text message with Alexa and others, to having sensors at home, to sensors in the community. So this is such a great experiment, which we can then, if successful, expand to the entire city or cities in that regard. And I think one of the key lessons we have learned is a health system alone cannot do that. You really require relationship with developers, builders, right? Infrastructure companies, and many of those security people. And that's where we see a role of Aggie Square or technology hubs within a city really playing that catalyst role, bringing all of us together. So Mark, thanks to your leadership, we're super excited about that. And that's a pivotal point for us to how we want to spur innovation in digital health space in UC Davis Health.
Thank you so much, Ashish. I appreciate that. This is to the broader panel. as you think about the examples that she shared, are there gaps in the technology that you think we need to be addressed, especially in sort of the healthcare vertical? So any of my panel members, if you want to go ahead and just chime in.
Yeah, I guess I can chime in with what we see in terms of the sensor technology that Ashish was speaking to. One of the challenges that we see, especially within buildings, is how do you effectively, one, connect to all the sensors in a way that you can extract the data easily, but also how do you process the data? So in many ways, in many instances, the sensors that get deployed use different protocols to communicate back to the cloud. So what we see is, how do we try and get a uniform, standardized way to do that communication? So we want to deliver this use case that Ashish is describing, but just from a practical point of view, when you're looking to deploy the technologies, to whatever degree you can standardize the way you connect to those devices, will make the integration a lot easier. So this is more of a nuts and bolts comment, because we see it all the time. Because you have, for instance, sensors in a building that operate using serial protocols versus network-based protocols. So it's like the conversion gets messy. And if you're talking, more and more devices connecting, it just becomes a bit of a management nightmare. So to the degree that you can standardize on the ways you can communicate to your sensor technology and up to the cloud, really creating this seamless device to cloud architecture or system of communication, that'll really facilitate that use case that Ashish, and it's right around the corner. It's just, the industry is just starting to kind of get to that point, but it's just not that seamless yet. It's easier said than done, but I think we all have that kind of equal goal to get to the state that Ashish is describing.
Thank you very much, Andy. Anybody else on my panel?
And Andy, just to, sorry, please go ahead.
I wanted to make one comment and also kind of tying it back to a question and answer that was going on in the chat in the background, if I can, Mark.
Sure.
Because of course there are technology challenges, yeah, and Andy described them well, but I kind of want to put it in a hierarchy. I mean, for me, the technology challenge is only tier 3 problem, because there's enough technology out there. And I tell you, for every solution technology-wise that we find will create other problems. I mean, but in itself, I mean, kind of the hierarchy, number 1 is digital inclusion. Rose mentioned it. And I think we shouldn't forget about that, because if we're not careful, technology will drive other forms of exclusion. So in that perspective, having digital inclusion in Phoenix, it's a big thing, because maybe 7% don't have access to technology or broadband internet across the US. I tell you, in Phoenix, it's above 25%. So in that perspective, digital inclusion is number 1. And number 2, unfortunately, is also the availability of cash for smart city projects, because the technology is there, but the economic models aren't there. Which, if I may, Mark, I'd like to answer Leah's question in the chat. She basically said, listen, Ivo, have you seen financial models that work? And could I explain? And I tell you 2 that works and 1 that doesn't. The one that works, and I think Mark and also Nagy Square, you're proving it, is the campus model. Because there is a natural equation when you draw investment and technology and talent, and therefore entrepreneurship, to a certain area, as small as possible, price of real estate goes up. And because that is an equation that fits a balance sheet of a realty company, construction and basically just real estate fuel entire projects. So that's what I call the campus model. It works. If you don't have a campus tier availability or ground to break, the second one that works well is the canvas model. And the canvas model is basically where you find a way to own critical data and therefore expose it to others and therefore attract attention. I think this is what Greenfield did very intelligently. They were the first to have micro positioning available through the air, and that that actually attracted additional cash. The one that doesn't work is the grant model. the grant model is very often used because they, I don't mind grants from government, don't get me wrong. Yeah, but the problem with a grant is it doesn't convert into equity. And because it doesn't convert into equity, it is a one-time infusion of cash that doesn't provoke an onward follow-on cash stream. And therefore, if you're not careful, a grant actually makes a non-profitable project profitable at the start, or at least cosmetically. So in my opinion, you should work with banks, but also private equity. We've got low interest rate to convert a grant model into an equity model, and then it might work. I'm sorry, it's very economic, but quite frankly, unless the economics work, digital inclusion will never be there.
That's fantastic, Ivo. I really appreciate that. So great points.
And Ivo, if I can just add on to your comments, I think which are so well said. I think sometimes the problem that happens is we try to look at smart city as a whole and try to address all the problems in one ecosystem. And no one has resources to do that. We are trying, at least in Aggie Squared, to have a very purposeful driven approach to say, can we have health as a focus area and really look at commercialization of the things that are created, right? Through joint ventures, through revenue share, and the feedback and the revenue that gets generated from that comes back to fund the innovation for that. And I think we have much more control if we focus that area. And we have a unique opportunity with a campus model. But we do want to create, to your point, Ivo, a campus model with a canvas model, right? We want to open up under open innovation, the data sharing. So not only it's the campus, but other places and other industry can come in a very open-ended manner, because we are opening our data for knowledge generation.
That's fantastic. One thing I think, and this is open to the entire panel, we're fortunate at UC Davis in the sense that we're in advanced development of our new innovation district. So we can incorporate a lot of the new technologies and infrastructure and resources. But many of my colleagues at the other parks have existing parks that have been established for many years, up to 50 years. And are there examples of certain smart technology that can be designed into or deployed in existing innovation districts to both leverage a lot of the great points you've made and examples, and also with that protection? I know it's both with Daryl and others, there's the protection side of it and doing it right. But what are some of the most impactful, I guess, technology that can be deployed easily in existing infrastructure? And I'm happy to pick names. So I'll start with Andy, because even though I'm looking at Ivo, I'm going to start with Andy to put him on the spot.
I think we've already touched on it, because camera technology is pretty ubiquitous. And I think leveraging your camera infrastructure to do other unique things beyond just recording and capturing video. So doing motion capture of objects and people and license plates using optical character recognition. These are technologies that are available now and are easily connected to the infrastructure that's already in place. So to me, not that people want to be completely viewed all the time, but I think leveraging an existing or implementing a new camera network to me is something you can do today. And again, you can create really interesting use cases. We've already kind of talked about a few here, but improving the health safety is a new one. And believe it or not, there's technology out there that you can capture data, process information at the edge in a completely anonymized fashion. There's always privacy concerns as it relates to video capture, but if you can process all the information at the edge and don't store it, and it's done in a completely anonymized fashion, I think these are technologies that can be deployed fairly easily and give you some really feature-rich use cases and create a really good outcomes for whatever you're trying to do on a given project.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, if I build on that, Mark, I mean, maybe some reassurance here, because interestingly, if you really simplify what we're trying to do with AI and IoT, we're doing nothing else but digitizing the actual world. Yeah, and in a way, that actual world is, while it is of course unique, it is full of standards. And what you may not know is that actually there's a lot of reassuring work going on in the background. One of the most universal language in the world is code. If you combine that with open source, then actually there's individuals, brilliant individuals from across the world that are now working on finding common tags to basically say, distinguish a dog in an AI feed, distinguish a falling pedestrian in an AI feed. And these are common tags that are being utilized in AI programming with actually universal code, which is shared beyond belief. It's really fascinating to see this no code open source environment where just basically somebody says, I know how to identify a falling pedestrian. Everybody starts using it. And then there is protocol conversion going on in the background as well, where data brokers basically transform the one video feed into another. And I actually think it's a beautiful thing in technology that there's much more sharing going on than you might realize, because we're all trying to digitize the same thing. So the real innovation then is having access to all these feeds is how do you develop a meaningful use case? And in that perspective, I actually have great hopes that these new use cases will not come from the technical people, but I actually ask for much higher involvement of the, with all respect, let's call the traditional industries. I want to have more involvement of doctors who maybe are a little bit hesitant because they think they need to understand technology. No, just talk to us about your problems. I'd like more involvement of industry experts out of utility. Yeah, how do you believe leakage starts? What is the biggest problems that you see? And I think we're not doing a great job as the tech environment of being easier to talk to. If we do that, more use cases will start.
That's fantastic, Ivo. Thank you very much. Let's see what.
Hey, Mark.
Yeah, please, Daryl.
You mind if I jump in on the security side a little bit?
Please do.
Yeah, just, and not to beat a dead horse here, but the one, I will say the one, and perhaps something that's not thought about from this, the AI component of cameras is the aspect of, you know, we look at insider threat, and that's kind of the focus of much of what we're discussing here, but we would also look at active shooter events. And the true reality is what software do you have attached to your system, and what is it identifying? What type of anomalies are you allowing it to assess and take a look at? And so from our perspective, simply, you know, what stands out, what is unique, and is that something that you're able to highlight and at least take a close look at? Is this a problem matter, or is this just something that's an anomaly that we need to move on from? But that is a huge benefit from that type of a system.
No, I think it's great because it's really amplifying. It's not its primary function, but like you said, it's just a resource for safety and security, even that for those smart communities or a neighborhood, wherever the system is being deployed.
Yeah, I'll make a Big Brother watching joke, but I think that's inappropriate at this time.
No,
so,
it's okay.
It's not Big Brother watching. It's your system.
Big brother, big sister, you know.
We're all a family.
We are. And you know, another thing is, you know, talking just about external threats, foreign groups. I mean, I know that there's through Europe and China and other things like that. And, you know, is there far more activity really going on than the population's really or communities really aware of? And how to keep, you know, everybody feels, even having employees in and things like that, the inside threats and the external threats, is it far more prevalent than we're really hearing about? Not to scare everybody, but it's something that to be aware of, we have to look at both inside and outside, right?
Yeah, obviously, you know, the interesting thing with our current media is everything seems to be presented in a very quick fashion, not necessarily truthfully. It's typically partial information, but clearly, I think we all know, and especially during this time frame of COVID, the level of anxiety in society is up. We've had a lot of hate conversations for probably several years now, not just the last year. And so is there an amount of activity that's occurring? For sure. Now, the true question is, is it an act of a criminal act, or is it just something that's kept internally within? And I will say, with a lot of people at home right now, the business environment is much safer. We didn't see any active shooter events until what, 4 weeks ago, for an entire year. And that's because people were at home by and large. And so as we transition back out of COVID and we all go back to work in one fashion or another, is to go back to where it was yes. And that's unfortunate, but that's probably the reality.
Thank you very much, Daryl. And I'm going to go ahead and go through the chat and see what questions, anybody have comments while I sort of pull up some additional questions?
Actually, Mark, I thought Ariela in the chat made a very interesting observation. He basically said there that maybe we should stop calling it smart cities and basically drawing the attention to industry where there's many smart initiatives, but they wouldn't say, listen, I'm smart this, smart that, because they actually communicate much more about the benefits that they provide. I think that's an excellent observation I wanted to share with the group, because like, for example, when Ashish is talking, you immediately feel that there is so much to be gained around the health. Yeah, that's a much more important message. So I actually think this is very good advice for everyone. And in that perspective, talking about the purpose of your entire smart environment, city, or whatever it is, it can be many things. It doesn't always need to be a very lofty, world-changing thing. I mean, give you a few examples. Of course, I talked about the one about energy, which is highly appealing to many people. But what I actually loved very much in Peachtree Corners, because it was almost like a regional initiative. They basically, their most compelling story is they wanted to compete with Atlanta. They wanted to say, listen, we're going to have 5G before Atlanta does. We're going to have faster growth on the real estate than Atlanta does. And in a way, it may be a micro purpose, but it damn well worked. But if I also look at that at the flip side, I spend a lot of time, and Mark, you'll remember this, with Sacramento. And the Sacramento message, when you kind of unveil this, is we're not San Francisco. And we're like, well, that's not really strong as a message, right? So you may want to work a little more an angle, because, what is appealing about your message rather than not being San Francisco. So I wanted to share that with everyone, because I believe Ariela made a very good comment there, and Daniel, you already responded. I think you're absolutely onto something there.
We did change that. It's now San Francisco is not us.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
for a while we were considering ourselves the East Bay. We're now more San Francisco's not us. So
yeah, but I think you've got everything going for you. I mean,
it's exciting, and thanks to all of you guys. Let me scroll down. Just having a problem trying to read through the chat.
I just want to resonate with Leah. How I think one of the key findings is, your quote, Ivan. Number one concern should be digital inclusion. If we don't pay attention to this, technology will drive exclusion. So perhaps, one of the things we were saying is maybe as an output of this panel can be a white paper where we can say, what are the top ingredients of a smart city? It has to be purpose first, identity first, right? A problem-based approach first and a solution-based approach, but really embedding within that, a smart city cannot be a smart city if it doesn't make its people smarter, right? And it cannot make the people smarter if we do not have a focus on digital inclusion and digital equity, right? These themes really resonate well. I can say probably not only in healthcare, but across all domains. So we'll love to kind of see if there are other comments from the panelists on that. But that quote really struck me. Awan, thanks for sharing that.
Well, and I think I just touching both on you and Ivo brought up earlier, is it's creating that concentration in a real estate side, but you're really creating, like Aggie Square in a sense is 8 acres, and the first phase is 1.2 million square feet. But that density of innovation and smart technology is what helps train and roll out to the broader community versus trying to make a widespread rollout without engagement and education. So I really think that's a great point. And again, any of the other panel members that want to weigh in on what Ashish and Ivo.
Actually, what Ashish said really resonate with me as well. When I think about smart city, I actually think about a resilient city. How do we build a resilient city that is sustainable in the long term? And I think there has been a lot of efforts that have been going on behind the scenes, setting up resilient cities that are being funded by some of the philanthropists also as well. And there are successes, there are failures, and I think each city has its own unique characteristics. And how do we think about using technology to build that sustainability in the long run? Like, for instance, in supply chain, we're not just really thinking about logistics, we're also thinking about reverse logistics. How do we handle some of the waste and be able to make sure that when we're in a built environment for a new city, a resilient city, that there is a way to handle this waste in a meaningful manner, to be able to recycle or actually return it when it's not used. So I think there are a lot of different elements to it that when I think about smart city, we can use the name smart city, but I'm thinking about more from a resilience angle. So I do resonate with you, and thank you for the questions that I think it was Arila that posted.
Let's see. A couple more questions we had from earlier is how can innovation districts be the first testing ground for smart city technology or compete for that? And I think of like attracting the Amazons, for the logistics hubs and everything, but how can innovation districts across the nation be, attract the companies to sort of be the first testing ground? If you guys have any ideas about that or suggestions?
I can just take a outside in perspective just to set the stage for that. I think the natural alignment is when you think of smart city, you think of government first, the city of the mayor first, right? And that puts a certain context and certain kind of a way of doing things. But if you think of innovation center first or institute first in that regard, it just has a completely different open framework because there are many regulations which government has to go by and public affairs. While the government can help things a lot more in governance, transparency, and creating a foundational element, I think the innovation centers actually can really accelerate and drive and bring the commercial people together much more faster, the university and the campus. And I believe there's more need to be played, more role to be played by partnership between public, private, or innovation centers, and not just reflects decision that a government alone is gonna do it, because no one can do it alone. That's just me from outside in perspective.
Thank you very much, Ashish. Anybody else that have any thoughts on that?
I would like to build on that. I think sometimes we have to be careful that we don't try and attract innovation because and then no comma or something. I mean, innovation is such a big thing. And if you look at that, every city, when you look back at your historic reason of being that city, there's always a historic reason why that city became what it was. Yeah, Kansas was with railroads because they were where they were in the middle. Miami has a Latin background. Whatever it is in a city, it can be anything. But I think when you want to attract innovation, bundle it with a theme, because that immediately will draw actual experts who have an association with whatever the theme is. Make sure you take a theme that's big enough, of course, but it will make you stand out. Because in my opinion, digital inclusion goes in two directions. First of all, everybody needs to be able to use your smart technology. We always say you shouldn't be smart to be able to use the technology. Yeah, the technology needs to be smart. You don't have to be smart to use it. But it also goes in the other direction, the inclusion of the experts. Because ultimately, we're just there to facilitate digitizing the actual world, because that's where things happen. And I, by the way, very much want to thank Daryl, because he just opened my eyes in terms of thinking, listen, when you want to build a security perimeter, why would you not invite the experts at the early start, as you just said? And it's kind of, how come we think we can come up with security solutions? We've never really dealt with that other than the digital version of it. So that's kind of my own example, trying to put this into practice.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Ivo. Anybody else have any comments or thoughts?
I'll add one thing to it, Mark. And when we talk about inclusion and equity and getting people involved on the security side, and what we see again and again is that generally the people who are victimized are kind of what, colloquially, it's the low-hanging, the criminals refer to as the low-hanging fruits, right? The people who are not tech savvy, the people who really are not tech aware, and unfortunately, some of those, a lot of them are elder population, who may not understand all the intricacies behind these technologies and security. So they would end up being victimized quite a bit. And so as they engage in these smart city benefits, they are also very, very exposed and vulnerable to some of the scams and some of the abuses that the bad actors will bring. The other thing is, as different technologies, different entities are more interconnected, is no longer enough to focus on your security posture alone. It is how you interact. Your security, network A may be very, very secure, but how it interacts with network B will expose it, right? So as an example, and this is relatively new and we're still looking into this, but apparently there's a protocol that financial institutions, it's a read-only protocol, right? So you think about it, it's read-only. You can only go in and you can only see, for example, without a full login, I can see a snapshot of my account and the most recent transaction, but I can do nothing else outside of that. Now, that sounds safe, right? It's convenient and safe. What we found out is potentially, again, we're still looking into the details, but potentially what, without the full logins, what the criminals are doing is they would go to another account, like a trading platform or a cryptocurrency or something, and they would try to link the target account to that trading platform. So what happens is the trading platform will say, hey, show us that you have access to the financial account. We're going to send a micro transaction, penny, 2 pennies. You get a lot back and tell us what was included. And so without the full login, they go in and they see the read-only, they see that 23 cents were deposited. They went back to the trading, they confirmed that, and now they have access and they can transfer money without the credentials, right? So the point of that is they are very creative and very persistent, and they will poke and poke until they find that that soft spot, and they execute in the case, and that example without even needing full credentials to the financial account.
That's amazing. And years ago it was more individuals who were doing it, right? But now, I mean, so much of these systems, machine learning and AI that they've developed to hack into, just automatically continue to try and try and try. That's amazing. Anybody else want to touch on that or expand from there?
I think just reading some comments, the concept of resilient city roads is also striking a chord among the audience here, and something I think we can build on further in the white paper.
No, it really does touch much broader than the technology. It's the impact and inclusive, with the communities, of all communities that are involved. So that's great. See if we have any more questions here. We're finishing up a little bit early on our group, but I really would like everybody to join me in thanking our panel. It was an honor for me to bring this group together, and I appreciate the diversity of topics and touch points across all the areas of innovation and smart technology or smart city technology, and especially going into the vertical of healthcare. And healthcare goes beyond the hospital, as Ashish described. It's not the care in the hospital, but it's healthcare in the community and healthcare within these innovation districts. So, again, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Vicki and Diana, I think, do we have a video that we want to show, or want to go right into the next segment?
It's coming. Sorry about that.
No worries, no. And just a reminder, everybody, again, next week on April 22nd is module number 3, which is the Building Inclusive Communities of Innovation, the essential diversity DEI strategies, and that'll be hosted by Leah Burton, who's our president of AURP at this point currently. It's a great opportunity, and I recommend that everybody attend that session, or all the sessions actually. It's a great topic and an important topic right now. And I think, Brian, did you have any comments at all? Anything you want to share with the group?
No, I think we're trying to tee up that video again, this time with audio. Maybe we can get Leah to give a quick overview of what's going to be happening next week. And don't forget, we are looking for a sponsor for our Grubhub the next 2 weeks. But Leah, do you want to give a quick overview for all of our folks on about what we'll be hearing and be doing next week for the module?
Sure would. Yeah. Thanks, Brian. And there's a chance you caught me getting into my snack box. So I'm clearing the peanuts out of my teeth right now. All right. Everybody, next week, we have a great group of experts who are going to be joining us. We have an expert from HRNA who leads their inclusive cities work, and Andrea Batista Schlesinger. She is going to be our opening speaker. And we also have case studies that will be presented from Wake County, which is Raleigh, North Carolina, a new program which is called A Better Wake. We will hear from our colleagues at University of Illinois Research Park and a program that they have created called Reboot. We will also hear from Research Triangle Park and Ray Trapp. He will talk about the case for change and the alteration, the way that they are flipping their engagement with owners and tenants and those investments toward a more equitable RTP. Lots of time for question and answer. I put in the chat function the goals that we have set out for this session. And so, the thing is that we've spent some time in the last conferences talking about the importance to our communities of innovation, of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then the conversations that I've had with some of our members have been around, all right, well, Leah, what do we do next? What are the measurements that we should be using? What are the principles we should be using when we are creating programs and initiatives that are geared toward more equitable communities? And so that is exactly what we'll talk about next Thursday. And I'm real excited about the lineup that we have. Thanks, Brian.
Great. Well, so let's thank Mark and all of his panelists for a great session. Thank you all very much. And we will reconvene on April 22nd at noon East Coast time. And hopefully we'll have a Grubhub sponsor, and you'll have your breakfast or your lunch or whatever. And so we're going to close out with the grand opening of the Phoenix Biomedical Campus, this time with audio. For those of you that want to stick around, watch the video. And with that, we're just going to close the session. But thank you all for coming to spring training, and see you next week. And let's roll the videos.
Thank you.
prisoners. What?